him and really just like all of the people on his list that he was going after, like kind of like what you were saying, Mark, about how like each person, villain or whatever person he's attacking is kind of its own chapter, like it could be its own movie. Like I could see this being turned into a series possibly,
or a musical with Michael Jackson.
Yeah, or a musical with Michael Jackson. I just thought those characters did such a good job with their maybe shorter time on screen or whatever. Like, just immediately you fucking hated them.
Right.
Like, they did such a good job of not caring that they were about to be murdered, you know?
Maybe my favorite was Lawrence Mason as Tintin.
Yeah.
I loved him. He's also I think only about a year later, he was in Hackers.
Right, yeah.
Who was he? What was his hacker name? Do you remember?
Wasn't it like Razor or like Acid Burn?
I think it was.
something?
Was he Acid Burn? I think it was.
Yeah, I think it was one of those guys. Yeah.
What Zero Cool is what they
Zero
ended up
Cool was the main one.
Right. Or was Acid Burn Angelina Jolie?
I can't remember.
We got to watch that movie.
Yeah, we got to watch Hackers now.
Oh, Hackers is just a classic.
Angelina Jolie nipshot, but that's not why it's a good movie. So that's the cast, and this movie had all sorts of problems. It was shot in North Carolina, which is a right-to-work state, which sort of sets up an issue here. Not that right-to-work states are always bad to work in, but you're working with a lot less control in terms of, like, we need a union specialist to oversee all stunts. So they're working with non-union guys, which I was a non-union actor for a very long time. I don't think it lessens the quality.
Right.
I think it can, the production as a whole, if not overseen by some type of union whose job it is to make sure there's shit going down that should be going down, I think that's where you can get into some problems. But this movie was plagued by a lot of different injuries, weather problems.
Yeah.
There was...
I mean, it was always raining, for Christ's sake.
budget issues. In fact, you mentioned the models, Dylan. They didn't have enough money to build like huge sets, so a lot of them were models. Like a lot of the car chases, a lot of the city shots were all done on model shots. So because it was cheaper.
Also, quick side note: Lawrence Mason's character in Hackers was Lord Nikon.
Thank you,
wow. Okay.
Lord
Sorry,
Nikon. That means Angelina Jolie's was Acid Burn.
Yeah, I think she was Acid Burn. Just wanted to clear that up before the mobs came forth.
Before we get hacked. Before we get canceled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this movie went through some backstage drama as well. I know the director, who also directs another sort of sci-fi classic and a moody piece called Dark City.
Yeah.
He also directed Gods of Egypt, I think. So,
yeah. I think he did The Knowing with Nick Cage.
Was Nick Cage in Gods of Egypt?
No. But the director of Crow, Gods of Egypt, he directed The Knowing.
The
Knowing. Didn't hear that. Yeah.
The Knowing with Nick Cage. Yeah.
Yeah. Anytime you direct Nick Cage, you're winning.
Yeah.
Fully.
And then he wanted to do the whole thing in black and white and have the flashbacks of his actual life be in color. I think they did about as good as you could. The studio didn't want a black and white film.
Right.
But what they did was great. It's
Oh,
about
I
as black
thought
as
so,
white
too.
as you can get.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally monotone, just very bleak throughout, and just changing the filters like they mentioned. You can, like we watched on the bonus features about doing it, and having like the red show up for revenge, kind of when you know that it's this kind of time to when the crow's going to show up. And then also just seeing the blood too as well, which is great. I wish they would have made the blood a deeper red, kind of just to show that offset during those times. But I think, as far as the mood and that they were trying to set besides black and white, this is even better.
Right.
I think so too.
And to note just farther, just to note more on the models and everything, like I said earlier, it had that expressionistic quality and they stood in ways that weren't natural.
Right, they had the leaning.
Yeah, they kind of almost Tim Burton-esque.
I was just going to say, it's not quite Tim Burton, but almost,
Yeah.
And
it gives you this feeling of being unsettled. Everything is a little off-kilter. It really sets that mood straight away. And then, of course, typically before blood is shed, on this very monochrome palette, you have a splash of red. There's that great shot of Tony Todd walking up the stairs.
Right.
And behind him, it's backlit. It looks like the fires of hell. And you know that his number's going to get called pretty damn soon. It's great.
Right, and it's Devil's Night, you know,
Right, this movie takes place on Devil's Night, the night before Halloween. The movie has all kinds of spookiness. Before we get into the spookiness, let's just go ahead. I mean, you can read for hours about this movie and what people think about it in terms of, or not what people think about it, we'll talk more about that, but just the backstory of behind-the-scenes stuff. And there's a lot of people who confirmed that everyone was on cocaine except Brandon Lee, who was on this very strict diet to the point where someone sneezes on set and Brandon Lee says, well, someone just wasted $50.
That's the best joke. That's the best joke.
It's so good.
That is really funny.
So who knows what really went on, but what we ended up with, and we'll talk about this before we get into sort of what I want to hear from you guys, which is some of the lore, maybe around Devil's Night, maybe around Halloween, and some of the stuff around crows or corvids.
If you are interested in more of a deep dive into the origins of Halloween and Devil's Night and that kind of thing, not to promote our own shit, but I'm going to do that right now. We do have an episode on that on Creepstreet Podcast if you're interested. The history around Halloween and the days around Halloween, I think, are so fascinating, and they go back, thousands of years. It's been around for so long, and it's been affecting people, and I think the fact that this time of year has had this kind of feeling to it all over the world for so long means something, and it's interesting.
Obviously, the Halloween itself goes back, thousands of years. It has its roots in Celtic mythology, but the reason where like costumes even come from was, obviously people felt back then that this time of year at the solstice, the whatever that curtain was between the living and the dead was at its thinnest, and spirits, both good and bad, could pass through back and forth. And the reason why people wore costumes is because they wanted to trick any evil spirits that might be out looking for them. And then, of course, as time has progressed, Devil's Night kind of took on its own thing in pop culture and kind of made its own little thing. But yeah.
Dylan, you were talking about the veil is thinnest, the costume to hide from evil.
Yes.
That's kind of fitting with the crow.
Absolutely.
It's very fitting.
He was able to come back maybe because it's Halloween.
Right.
Who knows?
Right. And also Halloween too, or Samhain, is like the pagan Celtic holiday that it originally kind of stems from, is a holiday or a feast or a festival that's very connected with fire. And so that is interesting then, that Devil's Night, basically what Devil's Night is, it's not like as hard and fast of a thing as like a Halloween or something like that.
Right.
But basically the idea is that it's a night where you can, fuck around and get wild. And it ranges anywhere from like originally just like, oh, like this is the night of like tricksters and there are, goblins out or whatever. So like we can do like fun little tricks on people. And then just
or
like
set an entire city on fire.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Right.
And as time goes on, as everything does, it just turns to shit. And so for some reason, people were like, we should really just pop off and start lighting fire, like do like serious vandalism. And for many, many reasons, it really clung on to Detroit. So Devil's Night isn't really a big thing in at least much of the U.S., but in Detroit, it really, really became a huge cultural and societal issue to like during the 80s, I believe the 70s and the 80s, it was, hundreds and hundreds of fires.
Yeah.
Were just all around the city and at like structural big fires, not just like lighting a trash can on fire type thing. So it's like what you're seeing in the movie, because this movie takes place in Detroit. I'm sure it is, amped up obviously for the movie, but like Detroit does have a lot of issues with, or used to, I don't think it's as much anymore, but like with inner city violence and vandalism and fires going on Devil's Night, so much that they like have something, or they used to have something called Angel Night. And so there would be like angel volunteers that would like roam the streets to like make sure nothing bad was happening on Devil's Night, which I think is a good thing. They just sound like boring hall monitors, but I think they were doing the right thing.
Right.
And Dylan, there's obviously a lot of symbology in this movie. What do you think some of the crow stands for? Because there's a lot of lore attached to this bird, which isn't a crow in the movie. It is a raven.
Right. Oh, really? So the bird they used in the film was a raven?
Yeah,
that's right.
It was a raven.
Well, actually, it's a good thing that crows and ravens both fall into the category of corvids, along with magpies and jays. So
all very intelligent birds.
All very intelligent birds. And thank you to Lucy for obviously crows have long been associated with whether it was death or sort of being messengers between the living and the dead. I just want to state a source here. I found a great article about it, but it's called The Mystery of Crow Funerals by Brent Swancer at Mysterious Universe. I just want to read this quote here, because we've always known that crows did have this incredible intelligence, but recent scientific inquiries have shown they're actually far more intelligent than we originally thought. Here's a quote directly from the article. Whenever one of their own species dies, other crows in the area will flock to the scene and linger about the corpse, squawking loudly and refusing to leave, in a strange gathering that has long been suspected to be some sort of mourning ritual and contemplation of their dead being carried out by the animals. A very in-depth research was done by a PhD student named Kaylee Swift and a biologist named John Marsluff from the University of Washington. This experiment was very interesting. They did it over a 2-year period. What they would do is they would have people in masks. So like one person had a caveman mask and the other person had a Dick Cheney mask. The guy in the caveman mask would feed them, and then the guy in the Cheney mask would harass them. Well, obviously, after a while, the crows knew who was good, who was bad. But even they started to realize that even when someone else would wear the mask, even when there were crows there that had not seen them before, they knew to be afraid of the Dick Cheney mask because apparently they're able to teach each other things, which is very fascinating. And they had one person in a mask. They had a crow that had died, and they just held it. They were walking through, and the crows began to mob them and attack them. And even when they didn't have the dead bird with them, they would still get mobbed and attacked because the crows would recognize them.
Yeah, they remember people.
And they were able to teach other crows who weren't there that that's how you treat this specific person.
How fitting is that with like the crow going around and being like, hey, there's that motherfucker, I remember him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it really is. It's like their ability to hold a grudge is incredible.
So tell me something, like, and this is something that I'm just curious about for both of you. With what you guys deal with on your podcast and everything too, and what you guys talk about, how do you feel, or what are your thoughts each on after death? What's your thought? Do you feel like this could happen? Like, do you think that somebody could come back to take vengeance, and maybe not by in their body, but by a spirit? What are your thoughts on like something like that, as far as coming back, not from the dead per se and raising up, but do you feel that that's possible? In your thoughts and your opinions?
Well, I mean, those are, obviously big questions. Now, obviously, in the way that it happens in the movie, I have no idea.
Right.
When it comes to things like the afterlife, I have this theory that it's a lot more simple than we think it is. I think that a lot of stuff they're working on right now with electromagnetics and gravitational waves. I know it sounds like I'm going off on another subject. Literally a few years ago, they were able to definitively prove the existence of gravitational waves. These are actual gravitational waves in the fabric of space, in the fabric of space-time, which means maybe that fabric can be torn or open. And I mean, that's why I think all this stuff, I think it might be more science-based than we actually think it is. It sounds like fantasy.
Right.
But first and foremost, obviously I have no idea. But I just have this feeling, this feeling inside me that a lot of these things that we think one might be considered science, the other might be considered fantasy, I think they're more closely related than we might understand yet.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I haven't had any specific experience to necessarily feel, yes, I definitely believe something along these lines is, a possible, or no, I think it's absolutely like, no, I don't think so. But this topic though, or like this theme, I mean, has come up again and again and again in stories and books and plays and everything for as long back as there have been people. Really, the idea of like a vengeful ghost or someone coming back to get revenge on what you did to them while they were alive. Like, I guess it's kind of the same idea as almost like karma too, where it's like you kill someone else and you think, oh, since that person is dead, that means that there's nothing that can be done about it anymore. And this whole kind of idea like flips it on its head, that it's like you're not as in control as you think you are. I can like pretty confidently say I don't think it's like literally a crow, that can like make you like, a zombie man. But this idea of getting vengeance or making things right or finishing your unfinished business from the grave is like really prevalent and kind of a common theme.
Yeah. And I think that's what I was touching on, because you see like spirits that come back after a gruesome death or, or anything like that, and that haunt the place, or that are supposedly haunting the place where the death happened. And we hear that all the time with ghost hunters or whatever, paranormal show you're watching. And we see that, but can it work the other way too, to where if this person or, being loved one dies, do you think that their spirit could come back in a way to avenge that death in a
Right.
way.
That's,
Not necessarily just raising from the dead in Detroit with a damn crow and talking to...
Right.
Totally. Right. Yeah.
And, in the case of the crow, it's kind of a very, because as you guys know, like, and as our listeners would know, there's different types of hauntings. Say the crow was a real thing, that would not be a residual haunting. Residual haunting is kind of what it sounds like. Say they're like